Hi, everyone. Welcome. Really excited to have all of you here today for a really timely and important conversation on tropical forests and on behalf of the WMBC Business Coalition. Just really excited for the discussion that we're going to have ahead. The focus for the webinar today is going to be on tropical forests and tropical deforestation. We'll learn more about the scale of the tropical deforestation challenge, but also the opportunity that it presents as a climate solution and the critical role of forests, not just in the fight against climate change, but also delivering broader social and environmental outcomes. We'll hear some of our panelists today talk about the urgency and the need to be mobilizing finance today to meet our goals of halting and reversing tropical deforestation by 2030, which the science is very clear has to happen for us to get back on track towards our climate goals. We'll learn more about jurisdictional approaches to REDD+, or reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, which works across the scale of entire provinces or states or nations, and as a way to bring scale and integrity towards these efforts to tackle tropical deforestation. And then we'll also learn why private sector leadership is so essential and why the moment is right now in the lead up to COP30, which will be held in Belém in the heart of the Brazilian Amazon. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Luke Pritchard. I'm the director here at the Beyond Alliance, which is hosted at the WMBC Business Coalition. Beyond is a coalition of companies that are working to bring scale, integrity, and impact to investments in climate solutions through market-based approaches. And for many of our companies, jurisdictional REDD or JREDD has really risen to the top of their priority list as a way that they can invest and mobilize finance in a really high integrity solution. But at the same time, we know the flow of finance is insufficient today. We need more companies to come on board and to join them. And I hope you'll learn about why that imperative is so important and what the opportunities presented by JREDD are with this panel today. So in terms of the agenda, we'll have opening remarks from the UK government at the Race to Belém, which is a recently launched initiative that's catalyzing private sector investments in JREDD. We'll have a fantastic panel discussion with representatives from private sector, from NGOs, from research institutions, and from the Integrity Council. And we'll have some closing reflections from Roselyn Fosuah ADJEI, who really has been a climate champion working at the front lines of protecting tropical forests in Ghana for many years, to talk a little bit more about her experience, why we need more people to join her and to join the broader global community in this important fight against deforestation. And then we'll wrap things up with some time for questions and answers to make this as interactive as possible. So we have a really great panel today, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Joanna Macrae, who is the head of strategy for the International Forest Unit with the UK government. In this context, a big part of her role is to serve as the forest carbon market policy lead. So, Joe, I just really want to hear from you why forests are such a priority for the UK government's international climate efforts, what's driving your investments in programs such as the LEAF Coalition, and how private sector engagement can help scale the support needed to deliver the ambition you have and your peers have in this space. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks so much, Luke, and to speak today. And what a great panel. So I'll be brief. I was kind of particularly excited to have this conversation because you'll be familiar with that good Chinese proverb that tells us that the best time to plant a tree was about 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And I kind of feel there's something akin to that in terms of the conversation around why JREDD, why now. And as you know, in the last 20 years, we haven't so much been planting trees as felling them all over the world. So we're losing forest cover to a huge degree. So every year we're losing an area sort of equivalent to the size of Poland. And so for the last 20 years, we haven't quite been doing the right thing. And all the evidence, as you say, Luke, is lined up that it is really time that we move that position because forests hold about 20% of the mitigation potential that we need to meet our goals on climate. They obviously have an incredibly important contribution to biodiversity. That mitigation number, that mitigation headline, I think is important to emphasize, actually underestimates the role of forests in climate regulation. because that only speaks to the carbon benefits of forests. And forests, particularly tropical forests, have these other fantastic attributes, these biophysical effects, which mean that they have these additional cooling properties. And so what that means is, as we're thinking particularly about the future of tropical forests, what we're holding in our hands is either 1 degree extra of heating or some real help in terms of 1 degree of cooling. So these are really important choices we're going to make in the next decade about the future of forests, and that will have major ramifications for all of us and for the climate. So from a UK government perspective, why within that kind of broad forest agenda are we concerned about carbon markets? And I think there are sort of 3 reasons that I'd like to pick out. So the first is that people aren't just cutting down forests because that's what they wake up in the morning and think they'll just cut a tree down. They're doing it because all of the financial incentives and the economic incentives are driving deforestation. And so forests right now tend to be worth more dead than alive. So you can make more money if you cut a tree down and you use it for logging, or you clear that land for agriculture, because keeping a forest standing isn't something that you can monetize either as a landowner or as a country. And so one of the important things about carbon markets is they help countries and communities to start to see a real value in forest protection and restoration. So that's reason number 1. Like we can use carbon markets to help to make sure that tackling deforestation pays. The second reason is that we're now in a really good position, which we probably weren't in 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, which is that we have the right methodologies that allow us to use carbon markets in a way that delivers both scale and integrity. And it's great to have ICVCM on this call, because they've obviously done incredibly important work in validating important methodologies like ArtTrees. There's still some work to do on those, but significant elements of the ArtTrees methodology have now been validated by ICVCM, and indeed the government of Singapore has done so, and ICAO. So what we've got is a lot of confidence that we've got the right methodologies in order to use those markets with integrity. And I think that's new. For quite a long time, we've been in quite a muddy space where there's been a lot of projects of uneven quality. But I think now we can be much more confident that there are these methodologies out there. And the even better news is that countries are using those methodologies to generate a really strong supply of credits. So what we have in the next few years is hundreds of millions of tons of credits coming on stream. And that's a tremendous opportunity for forest protection and restoration and for the economies of those countries. And then the final reason is that carbon markets provide countries and communities, particularly Indigenous people, with direct access to finance. So this finance has got a different quality to it from, say, ODA, from aid, because those countries are able to trade those commodities just as they would trade anything else. And then they can use that money to drive their own development and environmental strategies. And the methodologies that we have, like ArtTrees, do require that there's strong engagement from communities as part of the preparation of those credits, and to make sure there's a clear plan for benefit sharing. So this is incredibly important, that these markets we can see are beginning to transform lives. So we're seeing investments in sustainable agriculture, in education and community building around the world. And so for all those reasons, the UK government has been quite active in investing in the architecture that's needed to bring a robust forest carbon market to scale as part of the wider market. As you said, Luke, we were one of the founder investments of the LEAF Coalition. It's brilliant. They've now signed 4 ERPAs in Ghana. It's great to have Roselyn here, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Peru. And the total value of those ERPAs is in the region of $250 million. So this is sort of serious finance. And what we've also got is a coalition of quite a large number of corporates and sovereigns. And I think the final thing I want to say is this is the moment. We've got a very particular window of opportunity coming up. We have a COP in the forest coming up in Belém, and that's going to have a really strong forest flavour to it. And so I think investment in forest credits now, including importantly older credits, offer really outstanding value for money, given the particular role of forests in climate regulation and the huge co-benefits they deliver. So I really hope that many of you will sort of join us on this journey around bringing carbon markets to scale, because I think they've got tremendous potential. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Macrae. I think you couldn't have put it better. The best time to do this was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. I think, as you noted, the one thing we didn't have 20 years ago was confidence in the methodologies and the integrity in these approaches, which we do have now. And we also, as you know, have the scale of credits that will be coming online over the next 12, 18 months. So now really is the time for companies to be able to get engaged. And one of the platforms to do that is through the Race to Belém. And we're happy to have Keith Tuffley, the CEO of Race to Belém here. Race to Belém is seeking to mobilize billions in private finance for Brazil's forests by COP30. And Keith personally has a lot of experience across a range of sectors and businesses as an investment banker, trusted advisor to CEOs, impact investor, entrepreneur. He was also the former CEO of one of our partners here at the We Mean Business Coalition, the B team. So Keith, really excited to have you with us today. I was hoping you could just give us some of your views on how you see the interaction between environmental conservation, economic development, particularly in the context of scaling up efforts to protect the Amazon, which I know is so important to the Race to Belém.
Well, thanks, Luke, and thanks to the fellow panelists and everyone here today. Look, I'd like to make just three broad points before we get into the panel discussion. The first is about systems change, and I think this is what has brought me to be so enthusiastic about the jurisdictional REDD as a solution provider. I think we've all seen how having a piecemeal approach to trying to solve this crisis, can have unintended consequences. There can be a lot of leakage. The key problem is it doesn't look at the whole system and to address the underlying causes of issues. And that's where I've become such a strong advocate, having spent a number of weeks in Brazil and in the Amazon, the Cerrado, and seeing what's needed. And if we continue along this piecemeal approach to the challenge, we're just never going to get there. Another thing is we've got to address the deforestation in the first place, because at the moment there's a lot of emphasis on reforestation, which is great. It's critical. We have to reforest. But if we're going to continue to chase our tails down a hole at this rate, because we're going to continue to deforest at a much faster rate than we can ever possibly reforest, let alone the economic equation of it. So we have to address the deforestation destruction in the first place. And we have to do it at a scalable, jurisdictional level and a systemic way of thinking. And that is just key. So the Race to Belém, just very quickly, because Carolina here can talk in a lot more depth about this, but the Race to Belém is designed to be, and as you mentioned, Luke, my background in investment banking brings to mind and I guess skills around fast-track capital raisings for private companies. Here we are doing a fast-track private capital for a public good, and that all private companies rely on to some extent. So that's the purpose of Race to Belém. It's like a fast-track, date-defined mobilisation of capital, yes, for the Race to Belém campaign, and for that matter, anyone else participating in jurisdictional REDD, because this is such a seminal moment. There is no better place, no better destination than Belém in Brazil, at the heart of, or at the foothills of the Amazon, to bring this to the fore. And that's why the Race to Belém is designed to mobilise private capital at scale to a number of state governments in Brazil who actually get it and have put a lot of time and effort into developing the systems and the solutions, and therefore the credits. They're available now. They're available. What we now need is the private capital at scale to understand that this is such a great solution to the challenge. So we're working with Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, and We Mean Business, together with potentially other great collaborators, to bring this to a whole bunch of private sector companies who should recognise that we're all impacted by this to some extent. Vast amounts of capital, but to a jurisdictional level, state by state, systems-wide approach to the challenge. So that's the quick summary of what we're on about, and we're racing as fast as we can towards towards Belém, because we all know that this is such a great mobilising moment. So that's the first thing, systems change, which means getting all the relevant players in that jurisdiction to work together. And they're never going to agree 100%. That's impossible. It's like saying, here's a pot of money and everyone equally agreeing suddenly that how it's split. It's always going to require negotiation and discussion. But that's the key thing, is engaging with all the relevant players, the local communities, the Indigenous communities, other traditional communities, large farm holders, small, medium and state government, all the relevant players, to recognise it's got to be approached in a systemic and a collaborative way. The second thing I'll just touch on very briefly, which we're strong believers in, and I think we all need to do a better job at this, is the storytelling about this. And jurisdictional REDD provides such a great platform for storytelling. It's pro-development. Now, this is not about locking up land and excluding people. It really is about getting that whole system to work together in an inspiring way. So we're working, for example, with Open Planet, which is the great filmmaking company who have been the producers for a lot of the David Attenborough films in recent years, and developing and producing a number of films to help tell those stories about people on the ground, how it can be pro-development, creating a truly sustainable economic system and a true bioeconomy over time. It will take many years, but the point is that telling better stories, inspiring stories, personal stories, to bring people into what is otherwise just an acronym in a very exciting way is just critically important. Otherwise, it just becomes a technical issue as opposed to an emotional issue for people to get behind. So there's just a couple of quick points. The third point is private sector is key here. We must get the private sector to step up at scale now. We cannot wait any longer. So for all the companies on the call today, we really do encourage you to help step up, and with the great panel following, I'm sure you'll be hearing some fantastic insights of how the jurisdictional REDD program works in practice. Thanks, Luke.
Super, thanks, Keith. Really appreciate it. Another, I think, solid explanation of why the moment is right now. I think also just to that systems change point you made, anyone who understands tropical deforestation dynamics knows that the underlying cause of deforestation across the world comes down to governance, and JREDD fundamentally looks to transform governance, improve governance. And so I think that's why there's so much potential here, not just to work at scale, but also to come up with durable and lasting solutions. So with that, we'll go ahead and move to our panel. Really excited to have a fantastic panel here. On that panel is Frances Seymour, who currently serves as a senior policy advisor at Woodwell Climate Research Institute, where she's focusing on making COP30 in Brazil a lasting catalyst for positive change. Frances is very humble, but I think everyone on this call probably recognizes her as a luminary in this space. So excited to have Frances with us. We also have Jason Funk, Senior Director of NCS Forest Strategy at Conservation International, where he oversees their work on jurisdictional REDD. We have Abyd Karmali, a representative from the private sector, where he's Managing Director of Environmental and Social Business Advisory at Bank of America. Abyd's based out in London. And then we have Carolina Gueiros, who is the Jurisdictional REDD Plus Project Management Officer at Geonoma Florestal, which is a partner working locally in Tocantins with the Race to Belém initiative. And I think an interesting fact about Carolina is she actually has a PhD in JREDD, probably the first person in the world to be a doctor in JREDD. So excited to have her with us. And then finally, last but not least, is Lorna Ritchie, who's the Director of Public Affairs at the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. So Frances, for this panel, I'd like to go ahead and start with you. Given the current state of the world's forests, we've heard a bit about that already from Joanna and Keith, but why is now such a critical moment for forest action? What developments are you seeing in the lead up to COP, and why is it really critical for the private sector to get more engaged now?
Well, thanks, Luke, and thanks for putting together this webinar. Timing is key. I mean, I'll first say, in the real estate world, they talk about location, location, location as being the most important three factors. And certainly location is really important for COP30 because having a COP in the Amazon automatically puts a spotlight on forests that we can't afford to miss the opportunity to exploit. But also the fact that it's being hosted by Brazil, which is the government that has actually pioneered effective approaches to forest monitoring, addressing deforestation, payments for performance. So all great reasons for location. But on timing, I would make 3 points, and to a certain extent echoing what's already been said. The first is, forests are on fire. The world is on fire. And I think the key message coming out from the Global Forest Watch numbers that were released in May about forest loss in 2024, the loss of primary tropical forests, really hard to burn a humid tropical forest, but that loss almost doubled in 2024, completely due to the increase in forest fires. Joe talked about the different roles that tropical forests especially play in regulating the climate, not just through the global carbon cycle and all those benefits. The downside of that is that when we lose and degrade forests, those, instead of getting global cooling, we compound global heating. And we are entering a cycle of compounding, vicious circle of warming, drying, fires, emissions, warming, drying, fires, emissions that are contributed to both by greenhouse warming from emissions from all sources, but also the local effects of deforestation. So now is the time to double down on protecting the forests we still have and all those cooling services, as well as building the resilience of those forests to global change. The second timing point is, remember, we are at the halfway point between the COP in Glasgow 5 years ago and the goal that was articulated there to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. So it's an accountability moment politically where we need to take stock. How are we doing on that trajectory toward halt and reversing? But also look at the status of financial pledges, to look at the status of the commitments that were made to get deforestation out of commodity supply chains and financial portfolios, and there's certainly a role for the private sector there. But the last point, I'll just echo what has been said about this being a critical moment for jurisdictional REDD in particular. Unlike in Glasgow, as Joe said, we now have ERPAs. We have countries and jurisdictions on the cusp of issuances, and those issuances must be met with volume of demand and an attractive price to maintain momentum. As Joe said, we validated the integrity of the methodologies, but we need a demand signal to validate the vision and leadership of the people doing the hard work in these countries. And I'm looking at Roselyn on my screen, to really maintain the momentum of this, what we know to be the best instrument we have for addressing this global challenge.
Fantastic. Thanks, Frances. I think a recurring theme here, just to reinforce one more time, about why the moment is right now. And it's not just about COP30 in Brazil. That's certainly a component to it, but it's also all of the work that's gone in over the past 15 years to make this moment come to fruition and present this opportunity to mobilize investments with confidence. So Jason, I want to go over to you. You've been working on the science behind tropical forests and climate change for many years now. COP30 is really emphasizing the need for tangible implementation. Obviously, forests is on the agenda. So I was just hoping you could speak a little bit to how Conservation International is aligning its forest conservation efforts to meet this moment and to accelerate action at scale and with the urgency that we all need.
Yeah, thanks very much, Luke. It's a great opportunity. So echoing what others have said, we really at CI, we see COP30 as a pivotal moment. And the efforts we've been making to build JREDD over the past few years, and we've cultivated those seeds, are finally beginning to bear fruit. And so this is the moment to really make that all happen. So at CI, we've been preparing for this moment for several years, actually, and we've been building up our capacity to provide support for all phases and elements of JREDD. And in almost all cases, we've been working closely with partners. So I think you'll hear from Carolina about a good partnership right now in Tocantins and maybe expanding to other places. Race to Belém, Leaf Coalition, we're seeing all those as key members of this ecosystem, and we want to work closely with them. At the same time, we've been working to mobilize our expertise across 4 divisions at CI. We now have a very structured and clear process for how we can provide support and capacity building to jurisdictions in all the places where CI works. And we're eager to take those lessons and share them out with this broader ecosystem in whatever capacity, whatever format works best. So here to partner with others and here to sort of bring the lessons we're learning along the way. Right now, we're working with at least 16 jurisdictions. They seem to be growing every week. And our role is to help advise them, help prepare them, help create an enduring and trusted presence on the ground, often through our country offices, but in some cases with partners. And we're doing that in many of the places represented here. Have recently begun to work closely with the Indonesian government, where Francis has worked for a long time. We've had this long partnership with Tocantins that Carolina is now involved in, and actually been carrying a lot of the water up until now. Roselyn, we're not yet in Ghana, but we're hoping to be there soon. And in part, we're not there because it seems like you've done such a great job. We didn't think there was much left for us to do, but eager to engage and continue to provide support and share those lessons. There's a lot of South-South learning that's already possible right now, and we hope to bring that all to COP30 in a big way. So it does seem like it is the moment when corporations on this call have this opportunity to be part of what's really a transformative change with regard to forests into a phase of sustainable development rather than extractive development. So it's one of the most exciting moments of my career, and I've been doing this for a long time. Been to every COP since COP 14, and this is the one that really feels like forests are going to be a big emphasis. So I think it's time to make it real and make this all come to life.
Super, thanks, Jason. And I think one takeaway from this is, when we think about jurisdictional REDD, we think about governments. And yes, governments are really important in driving these initiatives forward and addressing those governance challenges. But really, these are multi-stakeholder initiatives. So what we see with REDD Plus on the jurisdictional REDD on the ground, and I think Carolina will talk to this and Roselyn will as well, is they're multi-stakeholder initiatives. It's bringing local communities, indigenous peoples, together with government, together with NGOs, together with other experts to craft policies and solutions and implement them on the ground. So thanks for some insights into how Conservation International is doing that, Jason. Abyd, I want to go to you now. I know Bank of America is interested in forests as part of the climate solution. And I'm just curious what opportunities you see in JREDD to help drive meaningful climate impact and finance at scale, and why Bank of America in particular is interested in this space.
Yeah, thanks very much, Luke. Look, I think the way we think about deforestation is that it's a critical piece of both the climate strategy and, in fact, of our biodiversity strategy. To Francis's point, so it's something that we need to be doing for multiple reasons. And in fact, it's it's not something that's new for us. Back in 2008, we developed the first ERPA for a project-based REDD Plus, and quickly learned that project-based REDD Plus is probably not the way to go. But in 2016, we helped arrange the world's first forestry bond with the IFC, and then last year the first debt for nature swap that was focused on terrestrial conservation. So there's been lots of things that we've been doing to try and mobilize private sector through different instruments. I think what is particularly appealing about the JREDD approach is really that it's the first point is that it's got high integrity. I mentioned our early involvement in REDD Plus. I think JREDD, to Jason's point, really moves beyond looking at things in a piecemeal fashion, and that is fundamental for getting more private sector involved, given their wariness about undertaking actions that really are not addressing things from an environmental integrity perspective. And having the core carbon principle endorsement, I think speaks to that as well. The second is really we don't see climate change as a linear process anymore, and there's evidence all around us, which I don't need to get into, but it shows that we absolutely have to avoid what in this case would be some kind of Amazon tipping point, and that's why the focus on Brazil, on the arc of deforestation, is so fundamental. And the third point is, JREDD is not just about carbon credits. It's really more of a systematic transition to a different model of rural development that's focused on forest positive, supporting the bioeconomy, and securing rights for IPLCs. So those are all the different reasons why we think this deserves our attention. Hope that helps. Thanks.
Thanks, Abyd. Really appreciate it. Fantastic perspective from a company in terms of what the opportunities are here. I want to turn now to Carolina. I think Keith made a good point earlier that there's really fantastic storytelling efforts about what this actually looks like on the ground. I think at the same time, generally, JREDD is perceived as kind of nebulous in terms of what it actually looks like. And so I'm excited to have you here. You've been working very closely with Tocantins as part of the Race to Belém initiative. Can you just give us a little more flavor of what this actually looks like in practice and what's happening in Tocantins as they implement and deliver on their JREDD program?
Yes, thanks, Luke. I'd be happy to do that. So because we have limited time, I just want to share with you one example that I think is very meaningful. So you guys can have an idea of what happens when you translate the JREDD requirements into action on the ground. So the R-Trees standard, which is the one we're using in Tocantins to certify the JREDD credits, is currently the leading international framework for generating these credits. And it's established, broadly speaking, it's many requirements, but broadly speaking, we can talk about MRV requirements and social and environmental safeguards. So the MRV requirements are those methodological requirements that a jurisdiction needs to demonstrate pretty much how it's measuring its carbon emissions from forest deforestation and forest degradation. The safeguards requirements are more about proving that while you reduce deforestation and forest degradation, and you didn't violate these basic requirements that we understand as the Cancun safeguards. And we can talk a whole lot about that. But the example I'm going to give you is from the MRV side of things. So one of the trees requirements is that jurisdictions measure and report emissions from deforestation, but also from forest degradation if they are larger than 10% of total emissions. So for you to actually establish that, you have to measure all degradation within the jurisdiction to determine whether it's above the threshold for accounting under trees or not. So our problem in Tocantins was that Tocantins is 91% of its territory is within a biome called Cerrado, which is a savanna ecosystem, while only 9% of Tocantins' territory is within the Amazon biome. So the Brazilian federal government has amazing data that quantifies and locates deforestation within the Amazon and also forest fires within the Amazon. But for the Cerrado, and for the ecologists here, fire in a savanna is a very particular dynamic, and it's hard to account for and hard to measure. And our federal government does not consistently monitor those forest fires. So the official data that we have on forest fires in the Cerrado, we could not use for the purposes of getting our JREDD credits under trees. So we worked very hard on finding activity data that could give us the fire scars in the Cerrado and Tocantins. And after much blood, sweat, and tears, we managed it. We got the numbers. And we were hoping it was going to be something, it was not going to be above 10% of total emissions, and we wouldn't even have to account for it. It was going to be fine. But when we got the numbers, the results were very surprising. Emissions from degradation in the Cerrado were actually higher than emissions from deforestation. And we now know from very recently that some years, degradation is about 60 or 70% of total emissions. This is degradation by fire. I will tell you, nobody was expecting that. And for a moment, everyone was like, forget about carbon accounting. What are we going to do about these devastating forest fires? So, I mean, the bright side, I guess it was for the first time, the state actually understood the true dimension of the forest fires problem. And I'm glad Francis touched on this because it's becoming such a pressing issue. And then it really having this information just triggered a much more targeted and effective public policy response. So the governor of Tocantins and the Secretary of the Environment became personally invested in this forest fire issue because this information came to light through the JREDD program. So Tocantins began the Foco no Fogo, or it translates to Focus on Fire, campaign last year. And it was about educating local producers, because most of these fires, they started when cattle ranchers clear their pastures with fire. And then because of climate change and just because of the dynamics of the Cerrado savanna, the fires just spread and they're very hard to control. So it was about educating these producers about how to not let this fire spread when you're doing this pasture clearing. And it was also about investing in more and better equipped fire brigades to fight the fire, especially during the dry season. And every year the dry season is more and more severe. So this year, it's amazing really to see, like this year, the state came up with the biggest firefighting campaign in its history. And it was all because of the JREDD program that made us measure forest degradation for the first time in the Cerrado. And also because of the private investment that the JREDD program made arrive in the state that allow us to quantify the fire emissions in the first place. So I guess to wrap up, what I see every day when I'm working, helping the state of Tocantins build this program, is the power of this private sector demand for high integrity jurisdictional REDD+ credits. It is, when it's generated, the credits are generating using this robust science-based framework that is the TREE standard. It's a very hard standard to comply with. It is very challenging. We have worked very hard on it. And it's not a silver bullet, but it's changing forest governance on the ground. It certainly is in Tocantins. I think that's the story I would like people to really hear and understand, like the power of the mechanism of JREDD. And I mean, I have many more stories. This is just the one that I had time to tell you, but please feel free to connect if you want to hear more stories. If you have stories of your own, I'd love to hear that. I'm from Belém. I'm in Belém right now, and I will be in Belém in COP. So will Keith. So please, let's connect.
Super, thanks, Carolina. I saw a lot of head nodding from Jason and Francis when you're talking around the challenges, but also the opportunities with getting that better data. And I think a lot of people think this data is what you need to do just to get through the methodological process and comply with our trees. But in the case of Tocantins, really fascinating that it was about kind of recalibrating and rethinking their strategy and their approach to align with what that data was actually telling them, and that this is something that would have never happened if JREDD wasn't on the horizon. So really fantastic to hear that story. Lorna, I want to pass it on to you. I think Carolina started talking about, you know, how difficult but important it is to comply with standards like our trees and really stringent methodologies. Historically, REDD+ has really come under a lot of scrutiny. I know at the Integrity Council, you've gone through extensive processes to evaluate methodologies. And I'm wondering if you can just touch on what that process looked like from JREDD, what the outcomes from that process were, and what any companies or interested buyers on this webinar now should know about the integrity of JREDD approaches.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I mean, really interesting to be part of this panel. It's so fascinating to hear all you experts talk so passionately about this work as well. So from ICVCM's perspective, high quality forest credits are really vital for tackling climate change. They've got huge potential. We've heard that they've potential for about 100 billion a year to be generated for forestry by 2050 through carbon markets. But it is really important that we get it right. And the issues that we've had in the past is a lack of confidence in the market because of challenges around integrity. And that's really how ICVCM, the Integrity Council, came about in the first place, was to bring back that confidence in the market and to provide that governance and oversight of the voluntary market. So our vision for the market is that where there is integrity, scale will follow. So we assess the integrity of carbon crediting programs and their methodologies. So only once a program and the methodology has been approved can the program then start to label CCP credits. So from our perspective as well, integrity is not just about additional emissions removed and reduced, but it's also about sustainable development and protection of nature as well. They're really core to our core carbon principles. So we have approved 2 jurisdictional REDD methodologies so far, the ArcTrees version 2 and VCS nested REDD framework. So both of these were found to be high integrity and aligned with our assessment framework. All CCP label projects must operate with free, prior and informed consent and assess and mitigate risks to local communities, be transparent about how they share benefits. And so these are not optional, but they're central to what it means within our framework to be high integrity. And the aim really is to deliver this systemic shift in the market towards high integrity carbon credits. We also have an assurance process, so it's not just the initial assessment, but it's also ongoing spot checks, annual reports from programs to check continued adherence to these rules as well. And we have a strong pipeline of credits from the JREDD methodologies that we've approved, so about 123 million under the ArcTrees methodology, and about several million under the Vera methodology, about 100 million. So it's really promising for the potential to support mitigation in these areas. I'm very happy to answer any questions about ICVCM or the work that we're doing.
Super, thanks, Lorna. And just a reminder to everyone also to go ahead and put questions in the chat, which hopefully we can get to at the end here. This is going to wrap up this portion of the panel. I think it was great to hear. A few high-level takeaways for me is like, the moment is now. The opportunity is here. A lot of work has gone in over 10 or 15 years to get us where we are today, where you can have that confidence in the integrity of these credits. The supply is going to come online, and there's a lot of hard work going on the ground that we heard from Carolina to make these programs a reality. So I'd like to thank this panel, and I'd like to move on now to bring Roselyn in to give some final reflections here. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Roselyn truly is a forest and climate champion. She's been working on the front lines in the fight against deforestation in Ghana for many years, and I think she's just one of thousands and thousands of really important civil servants that are on the front lines across the tropics, working every day on this, and that need more support. They're working often in very challenging and under-resourced situations, but doing a fantastic job. And Roselyn, I know Ghana has made some really fantastic advances in REDD+ implementation. So I thought I would turn it over to you with just some more reflections on what that's looked like in Ghana, how you're engaging with communities, how that's manifesting itself in policy, and then also just kind of reinforcing what we've heard throughout, why engagement from the private sector is so important right now, and what you would like to see from companies that might be joining this webinar. So Roselyn, over to you.
Many thanks, Luke, and it's been a very wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all the panelists and the earlier speakers as well. So first of all, I want to reinforce what we've heard from the discussions. REDD+ or JREDD is actually possible. Countries like Ghana have proven that it is possible. It has far more reaching benefits than credits, as Abyd mentioned. And it's really turning around the socioeconomic development of the jurisdictions that are engaging in this, so far as the right safeguards are put in place. Albeit it also has challenges, it's complex, it's integrated, and you need a lot of moving wheels to get to the successes that, for example, a country like Ghana has got into. But bottom line is possible. And in terms of the question that you asked, I want to do some unpacking of how we have gone about this. Now, engagement of local communities and indigenous people is ultimately paramount. For Ghana, we have local communities. And first is to respect the rights, the voice, and also the presence of local communities. It's very, very important. You can have them present, but they might not necessarily have the voice. You can have them present, but you're not necessarily respecting their rights. So their rights, their voice, their presence is very, very important. Now, the very first step to achieving this is to build your REDD+ strategy, which ultimately defines your drivers of deforestation together with local communities. Because Joe mentioned something which was very important, the fact that people just don't wake up to go do deforestation or forest degradation is linked to livelihoods. And so if you are building any JREDD program and you're not defining your drivers of deforestation with local communities, chances are that you're not going to come up with solutions that they identify with. And so ownership of the solutions becomes a problem. And then implementation is also going to be challenged. The second thing also is that you need to define jointly, again, inclusive governance structures. Now, how do you bring people to the table? It's okay to just say, let's respect their rights, their voice and their presence, but you need to have the structures very well laid out. There should be inclusive governance right from the bottom to the top. And in Ghana, this is what we have done, where we have our local communities through to the district, to the sub-regional, all clustered up, zoned first before clustered up, and then they have their leaders elected. And so they have their own leadership representing them on the ground. And whenever we have benefit sharing conversations, they are being led by their own leaders. And they're also represented by their own leaders. Thirdly, they also receive these benefits themselves. So in many fora, we hear about the fact that finance must flow directly to IPLCs. In Ghana, this is happening. So for the first two issuances that we have had through the Carbon Fund program, the results-based payments are allocating 69% to local communities, and they have their own bank accounts and they're receiving this. No third-party interference. They define what they want to use it for through their own subcommittees. And this is working wonderfully, albeit it comes with a lot of work. For example, generating the database, because some of the local communities are in areas where there isn't even access to internet, how to input the data, because we need the data. We need to understand how this is impacting the lives of men and women and do different segregations and understand how we can also learn to move forward. The fourth thing that I would want to say is that the speed of delivery of finance is very important for local communities, because, you know, we are competing with different things. Illegality is on the ground. Illegal mining, illegal logging, it's all paying. And Joe mentioned this again. It's as if killing the forest is paying more than the standing forest. And so if we are not able to deliver finance that would help us arrest deforestation and forest degradation, then you keep demotivating local communities from engaging, because it's an issue of livelihood, and the willingness to pay is very important. Now, on the side of policy, what we have realized is that REDD+ policy must be built on existing policy that supports its implementation. So, for example, in Ghana, we have the climate change policy. We also have a forest and wildlife policy that's updated to focus more on the non-consumptive uses of the forest. And so that becomes a very foundation and enabling environment for us to keep working on JREDD and to reap a lot more benefits. And then on policy, I also want to mention that it's very important that REDD+ policies are also built around bankable economic priorities. So again, if you look into Ghana, our REDD+ strategy is built around key commodities. We are talking about cocoa, we are talking about share. These are commodities that bring attention to the table. And so we have built our REDD+ implementation strategies around them. And also these commodities are suffering from deforestation. And so then you have the right people, the right policymakers there, and you are able to define your bankable economic priorities. Now, on the side of private sector, and even before I go into private sector, it's also important to mention that on the side of policy, high integrity is also important to the supply side, just as it's important to the demand side. And that's very important for every policy that comes up. Most times the conversation is such that the demand side wants high integrity, but I have come to know that really the high integrity is even more important to the supply side than to the demand side, because we are in touch with these commodities. And if we lose them, if we lose our forests, the impact will be felt first at the local level before even at the global level, because communities depend on these resources. Now, on the side of private sector, when we started REDD+ some 16, 17 years ago in Ghana, we had our private sector being interested, but not at the level that they are now. Now there is a lot more awareness. Private sector wants attribution, and attribution is one of the things that can become a little bit unclear in JREDD programming, because if you have a large landscape and everybody is pulling resources in, private sector would want to say, well, probably my contribution led to the reduction of X amount of emissions. But it doesn't get that so specific and clear unless we have delineated areas where private sector has their own baseline. And so this is one of the challenges that we are trying to work through in Ghana to still stimulate the interest of private sector. We've also realized that private sector largely can provide the needed price that we talk about when we talk about carbon markets. But they normally want to look at the signals from sovereigns from the global north, that if the sovereigns from the global north have that confidence, then they're also going to follow. Example is the LEAF coalition, the first that we have seen of public-private coming together. And you see that largely the sovereigns are providing a space for the private sector companies or the corporates to be comfortable to invest at a price that is higher than, from when we started with LEAF, that was already on the market. And then I want to wrap up by saying that even though private sector has the capacity to pay, we are not seeing that pay because most times private sector is thinking about risk. And the forest sector is riddled with so much risk. We have standards that are coming up that are saying that we should prove permanence for 1,000 years, additionality through different clauses, leakage. Every day it's as if forest and nature faces some kind of bottleneck that practically makes implementation difficult and tedious. I think that the biggest risk, if we are not careful, is not protecting the forest. We risk not protecting the forest, and that is our biggest risk at the moment. And so no matter what it is, private sector should have that confidence to invest. The scrutiny is good, but scrutiny should be to a particular level, a level where both parties are confident that we can work at this in a stepwise manner. Now, Carolina mentioned that the tree standard, for example, is quite difficult to navigate. Now, I am happy to be an Trees board member. I know the kind of standard that we are talking about. Ghana is applying it. It is very robust. And so it will be so difficult for a country or a jurisdiction to go through applying the tree standard, and then you still have private sector not having confidence in the credits that are being generated. I think that's really demotivating and does not help with the skill that countries and jurisdictions can really take this to. And so we must scrutinize, but let us scrutinize in a stepwise manner that helps both parties. And I just want to wrap up by saying that I don't think it will be good for any of us to drop the ball now. The conversation, even within the compliance markets, is becoming quite tricky for forests. And so if we are not able to hold things down and appreciate the progress that we have made on forest now, as we get to COP30, we are just going to probably create a very messy situation in the space, and all the gains that have been made will be just wiped out. Thank you very much.
Super, thanks, Roselyn. It's always great to hear more about what this actually looks like on the ground. We had a question come in while you were talking about what the role of government is, and I think you did a great job of illustrating what that has looked like in Ghana. We have a few minutes to start going through some of the great questions that we've had come in, so I think I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. Francis, I might do this first one for you, because whenever I'm confused about things, I find you do a great job of explaining things in layman's terms for me. So this question was just, in layman's terms, what really are the key differences between REDD+ and JREDD?
Well, actually, REDD+ as negotiated under the Climate Convention is JREDD, because under the Climate Convention, REDD+ Warsaw Framework, and actually you should turn to Jason for this one, because it's really about accounting for forest-related emissions at national scale or on an interim basis, subnational. And back in the day at the COP in Bali in 2007, that unleashed the REDD+ roadmap and negotiation streams, project level REDD+ really came alive under the framework of demonstration activities. So really, REDD+ is JREDD+, and project scale crediting really needs to be nested under jurisdictional frameworks. So I think that's the key point there.
Thanks, Francis. Jason, did you want to complement that all in layman's terms, please?
Just to say, like, that was the intent, was to use those demonstrations to help pave the way for a more systemic approach. And that's what JREDD is all about. Countries get that. We definitely need the work and expertise that project developers have built over time. But we start to talk about them at CI as it's like an individual doctor treating its patients. And now we need to build the hospitals where those doctors can work in a more systemic way and work collectively toward better health outcomes, in this case, health for forests rather than people, but also it does have benefits for people as well. So we're kind of using that metaphor to explain that distinction.
Great, thanks, Jason. Love that analogy. We had another question come in around Brazil's tropical forest forever facility. Is that a better way to scale forestry preservation than JREDD? Is that going to be a battle at COP? And I guess this is my own question. Is it an either or is it both and? I don't know who wants to take that one first. Francis, I'll go to you.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to dominate, but I've been immersed in the TFFF as well as REDD+. The government of Brazil and really all participants in the process of championing the TFFF are clear that REDD+ and TFFF are entirely complementary and indeed synergistic. So it's clearly a both and. They are complementary because REDD+ incentivizes action on reducing the flows of carbon, the deforestation and degradation, whereas TFFF rewards the standing stock of forests. So complementary in the landscape. They are also complementary in time frame, reducing deforestation and degradation, the urgent need, and we have the instruments available now. TFFF rewarding the long term, a certain international payment, for the foreseeable future for that conservation. They're also complementary in the sources of finance they will draw on, because REDD+, it's market-based, sales to corporations that want to abate their unabated emissions, whereas TFFF will use sovereign money to attract debt finance from financial markets. And that's not all. They are synergistic because all of the institutional infrastructure we've spent the last 15 years building for REDD+, the kinds of things that Roselyn was talking about, the infrastructure for governments and indigenous communities and others to negotiate with revenues, TFFF can plug right into a lot of those systems, so we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. So it's definitely a both and a win-win all around.
Great, thanks, Francis. Very clear. We'll do one more question, and for those that we can't get to or that we won't get to, we'll do our best to follow up in writing after this. I think a really good point here that for corporate internal buy-in, the business case has to go beyond just goodwill, especially in the kind of current situation we're in globally. But even with net zero targets approved as early as 2040, it's difficult to get investment budget for management teams when the only payback is in terms of reputation, but also recognizing a lot of companies see reputational risk here. So the question basically is, do you see voluntary and regulatory carbon markets coming together, a convergence there as a credible solution to drive more demand for jurisdictional REDD? I don't know if anyone wants to take that very briefly.
Yeah, it's Abyd here. Let me
thanks.
Give it a go. Look, I think the voluntary markets have a key role while we're in this kind of interim period between what used to be the old Kyoto mechanisms under the Kyoto Protocol and potentially a fully fledged Article 6.4 mechanism. The other point is that Article 6.4, in terms of the methodologies that the board is focusing on, they're focusing primarily on technology-based reductions as opposed to the forestry sector. So I think JREDD is a really key piece of the puzzle for several years going forward.
Super, thanks, Abyd. Really appreciate it. Just a few final things to mention as we wrap things up. As a follow on to this, we'll send an email out to everyone. We'll answer the questions that we didn't get to. We'll point you to additional resources about how you can get engaged and more information on jurisdictional REDD. A quick point to everyone that Art Trees is currently in version 3.0 consultation right now. So there's an opportunity to get engaged there, and they have an additional Beyond Carbon certification. So we'll provide information on how to get involved in that. Article 6.4 has a consultation right now as well around non-permanence. So we'll just provide other information in case you want to provide a response. It's coming up here soon in August. And then finally, there is a new coalition to grow carbon markets that was launched in London. And so I think a lot of opportunities as well to explore this idea around convergence between voluntary and mandatory markets. So with that, we'd like to conclude this session. Thanks to everyone who joined. A huge thanks to this panel. It was really fantastic discussion, a lot of expertise from a lot of different angles. I think my big takeaway from this is that the time is right, the time is now. There is integrity and there's opportunities for investment now. And if we don't find a way to catalyze more private sector interest, this opportunity might go by the wayside. And if it does go by the wayside, then we're really putting our climate goals at even more risk, and we can't afford to lose this opportunity. So really encourage everyone to explore more. Again, we'll send out some information on how you can do that. And would like to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Luke.